stand on your 2 feet and look up to the sky. Open up your heart and let your spirit fly.
Well, hi there. This is Bob Noonan.
And Roger McDermott.
And welcome to Steppin' Out. Steppin' Out is a program that Roger and I have been doing for over 20 years. It's really about stepping out of the darkness and into the light. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest." He heals the wounds of the brokenhearted and binds and heals their wounds. So when we look at stepping out, it's not just about drugs or alcohol addiction. It's any addiction or trauma that's gone through your life that impedes you from trusting. You know, the truth of the matter is, and I'll get into that in a minute. We have a very special guest, and Roger, introduce our guest.
Yes, a very special guest tonight, Pastor Joe Furey from His Place Church. Joe, we're happy to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, indeed.
Familiar faces.
You just had to
love you
walk
guys.
across the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Joe, you say something that I heard you say it last week, that we're born into relationships, we get hurt in relationships, and then we heal in relationships. The problem with that last one is many people don't stick around to be healed. And how often have you said for people to raise their hands in a service, how many people have been hurt by a church or Christians in a church? Every hand goes up, right? You just did that.
Well, whenever you get people, there's going to be some problems.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Well, we're so happy to have you. And Pastor Joe, we all have something in common. We all grew up Roman Catholic. We've all become born again Christians, but we all went to Catholic school.
Correct.
We've all recovered.
Yes.
But you know what? There's some things I look back at, guys, that was formational for me. I always believed about Jesus, and there were some things I could transition when the gospel was really presented. Did you guys find that?
I had no issues with being raised Catholic. I was 12 years of it, and foundationally it was good. I made long friends. I didn't have any trauma like some did. I don't regret it. I'm just grateful that I got into Christianity without all the tradition and the dogma and so forth. And I'm sure, Joe, you can relate to that.
Well, yeah, I went 12 years to Catholic school also.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, I was molested by a priest. So that had a profound effect on me in the sense of I looked at these as men, just men, not somebody that's on some kind of higher spiritual level. And when I would see this guy doing service and then also know what he was doing in the background, it repulsed me. And it turned me actually against Catholicism in particular, but Christianity in general. Yeah. I like Jesus, I just thought he was a weak dude and couldn't control his people.
Well, Jesus didn't like some of his friends, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, a lot of people talk about the trauma they have, and if we don't face it on, and sometimes we're too young to face it, to even understand what's the process. But I've always noticed this, and you two are experts in this, is that when we come out of really dysfunction, we have two ways to go. We're either going to be a codependent and control the outside world, or we're going to be an addict. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think trauma is the root of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is we're doing a documentary on our live, Teresa and I, and the family and all that, and we've gone to Santa Ana a number of times. And when I get into Santa Ana, I feel immediately hypervigilant. And I used to bite my nails to the quick, and our neighborhood was so unsafe. And then the school was unsafe because of the priest. And then my home was, topsy-turvy. So there was really no sanctuary. And so I grew up very, very aware of all the surroundings, aware of what's going on, even when we were filming one day, there was a guy riding a bike towards us, and I was checking him out from almost a block away, just seeing what's he gonna do, and it was just like, wow. And they asked me, what do you think being here? And I said, I feel sorry for little Joe. I feel sorry that he was always scared and always anxious.
You think that's what drove you into drugs?
I think it had a profound effect.
Yeah.
Because first time I ever did cocaine, I did pot, and I smoked pot daily and sold it and all that stuff. But man, cocaine, it calmed my mind. And I remember the first time I ever did, I said, I'm doing this for the rest of my life. This is a good feeling.
Yeah.
So I think once you get that, because it kind of has that effect that everything's okay, everything's good. And it was like, oh, I like this feeling. Even though it was temporary, and of course, over time it added all kinds of other issues. But never really dealing with the, root stuff.
Yeah.
But it anesthetized until it didn't. And
You and I have a similar story. I was molested by a step-grandfather, and it started at 4 years old and went on until I was 10. But when I became an altar boy, I had a radar. So when the priest said, hey, Bobby, I need to see you back in the vestibule. Hey, Mikey, Father wants to see you, kind of thing. So I always, but it cost me my innocence too.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
And so when you're going through this, and you've said it many times, especially I love the OC Weekly that had the the
punk
pastor
rock
to
pastor.
punk rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just tell our audience, how God brought you not only to salvation but to sobriety.
Well, it was a long journey. I think numerous things happened. I think one of the key steps was, and I shared it before, where I was on my porch writing out on a piece of paper what I was going to do with my life. And I was probably about 21 years old. Mm-hmm. And on that piece of paper, I started dividing it, 100% of my life into percentages. And, so much percent for work, so much percent for travel or whatever. And then I got down to religion, because I always believed that there's got to be a reason we're here. I just couldn't believe we were not here for any reason. And I attribute that belief to some purpose to the Catholic Church, because it introduced me to God, but I never really had a relationship. But I remember writing on that piece of paper and writing, I'm going to do 20% religion. And I heard this voice, thou shalt love in King James, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. And I jumped up out of my chair. So I've had a couple of moments like that. And I didn't know at the time, it's another 10-year run, but that started the journey of trying to find out why we're here. And so, the addiction lasted for a long time and did all kinds of crazy things behind it, and like everybody. And finally, I married Therese, my wife, and we had 3 kids, and she said, I can't watch you die. Because I was driving a beer truck. I drove a beer truck for a decade. And she said, I can't watch you die. I weighed 128 pounds. I was a mess. Roger knows some of the story. He's heard it.
Right.
And that was the change when she told me to move out. And that's when I was in this little dumpy motel in Orange, and I was sitting on the bed with my last bit of drugs, and I heard a voice say, what do you want out of life? And same voice as before, but just a straight question. And I started crying. And that's when I started my real life of recovery. 9 months prior to that, I asked Jesus to come in to my life through my best friend growing up, who got saved in college. And I finally had ears to hear, but it changed nothing in my life. In fact, everything got worse in those 9 months to where Therese left me. And that was the beginning of the change in my life. And I found purpose. I wanted to help people like me. God didn't ever give me that purpose in the sense of I heard another voice.
Yeah.
It was just something inside that I want to help people like me.
What do you think was the difference between that? Because we all know many people that their marriages are falling apart, and I'm going to be a good boy now kind of thing for a while, but they really don't change. And even in the midst of losing everything, that drug is the center of their life, and it's the idolatry of their life.
Well, when I heard that voice, that's a great question. when I heard that voice that said, "What do you want out of life?" I thought about it, and I want my family. I wanted my family. I could not see my kids. And my daughters, the twins, were just born. So they were, babies. And my son was 3 years old, and I could not see. He was my buddy. And I could not see living life without them. Yeah. And I love trees, but I didn't know how to do it. So that was the greatest motivation at that point in time. And then as I began to get sober, and when we went to care unit, which was back in the day, I'm sitting across the table from the guy, and he gives me what I need to do. But before that, there was a spiritual awakening that happened before I ever knew anything about the 12 steps.
Roger, let's go back for a second. You said something really important, because most of us that come from families where healthy relationships aren't modeled, we don't know how to do it. Right. And we fake it. We put a mask on, and I think this is what she wants, or I think this is what I'll do. But it's so inauthentic. How much more authentic is it to say, I don't really know how to do this, teach me? Or what is it you need?
Oh, yeah. Well, when I started recovery, the guy said, you got to do 90 meetings in 90 days. Don't use in between meetings, get a sponsor, and all that stuff, and I did it. And because if I signed this piece of paper with them that if I did that, Teresa would move back.
Yeah.
And so we could start that. But I didn't know how to
It's
do
called
marriage.
bargaining.
Yeah. But it was enough for me to, I was motivated. I was motivated, and I was committed, and I hated my life. I hated my life. I was doing it, but I hated my life.
You know what I find interesting, Joe and Bob, is that I did not grow up with dysfunctional parents. I grew up in a safe neighborhood called Friendly Hills, Whittier. I grew up and was the youngest of 3 boys and didn't have any trauma. And yet I self-destructed, took my wife hostage, and I did all those things with no one to blame. Ultimately, it came back to me. And I couldn't point it at trauma. The only thing I could say is that my wife, like your wife, did not throw me out. I actually abandoned them and left them. She should have divorced me. In hindsight, I deserved that. But it didn't happen. And it was till finally I just came to grips with, God's got a different plan for my life, and I had to stop being the person that I was. And I just had to surrender. And then everything began to change. But it was because of Court was sending me to AA, sending me there. And I ended up meeting the guy that I had learned about for 12 years, but didn't have a relationship. Like you said, you believed, but you didn't have a relationship. I believed, but I had no relationship. And I just find it interesting. Addiction doesn't matter who you are or where you came from.
Well, he's been telling me this for 20 years. I'm going to find the trauma somewhere. But the truth of the matter is, and you guys will think I might be nuts, but when I see people coming from trauma and then they go to addiction, I understand it. But on the other hand, when I see somebody like Roger, whose parents, being the youngest, gave him everything, so he never had to go without. And when you hit the world and you hear no, you don't have the coping skills for that. That's trauma too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't have coping skills for no.
Yeah.
I did not. No meant maybe, and maybe meant yes. And that's the way I rolled.
So, Joe, you
didn't become resilient, and therefore you were prone to, if it didn't go your way, you're going to do something.
I had no concept of how selfish, self-seeking, and self-centered I was until I got into recovery. I had no concept, because I always got what I wanted. I was a spoiled brat. And when reality hit, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not good, Roger.
That's good.
So this is how the healing started. How many years after that did you end up at the Orange County Mission?
About 4 years.
Take us through that journey and what you did there. I'm sorry.
No, yeah.
Well, when I started getting into recovery, the same guy that led me to the Lord, at his church, they had Overcomers Outreach, which was really
Bob Bartosh.
Yeah, Bob Bartosh and Jess Maples. They kind of put that together. Well, Jess Maples became my sponsor and my spiritual mentor. So he and his wife would come over and start to mentor Teresa and I. And that relationship, although he died, I don't know, within 2 years from cancer himself, that relationship started me learning, and Therese learning, how to do marriage. And what's this thing about the Bible? You know, I don't ever, in 12 years Catholic school, I don't ever remember opening a Bible. I know we studied the Christmas story a little bit.
Catechism.
Yeah, but yeah,
Bible.
in the sense of the Bible. So that was, and then within 3-4 months, because he was getting sick, I was taking over that meeting as kind of leading it, and I didn't know my head from my foot, you know, so it was, you know, immediately into service. And I was going to AA meetings and mainly CA meetings, and then they started NA meetings at some point. But I mean, I was immersing myself in recovery, and how I got to the mission, and all this time I'm still driving a beer truck. I'm learning not to steal, not to deal, not to drink.
Not to take the truck to the mission.
Yeah, I mean, and so and in that period of time, the mission, somehow I got hooked up with the mission and started doing a 12-step group on Saturday mornings. And that was my intro into ministry. And then from there, they asked me to come on board within 4 years. And that was my initiation into ministry.
When do you think you found your purpose? At what point in your journey from being thrown out of the home, right, from Therese and the mission?
Very shortly after that, I just remember wanting to help people like me. Because when I was at the church, we were at Sunlight, I started a recovery overcomers there. Then I took it to 2 other churches. Then at Care Unit, I was leading a Christian 12-step meeting. So I was leading 4 meetings a week, and I had a year and a half sobriety. I remember first time going to our pastor at Sunlight and saying, can I do a 12-step meeting here? And the pastor's wife said, well, how do I know you're not going to use? How do I know you're not going to go back? And the only thing I could tell her is, you don't know. But if I keep doing the things I'm doing, you know, and living it out, you know, I should not go back. I can't guarantee it, but I live one day at a time. You know, I can't guarantee the future, but if I do the do, I'll get the get.
So you saw so much brokenness at the mission, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, when we're beginning the journey, God doesn't show us the end process yet, but God was preparing you, obviously, for another ministry too, right?
Absolutely. I didn't know it at the time, and I resisted the mission because there was a lot of corruption there. And I think most people, when they get into ministry, they think everybody loves Jesus, and they're all holding hands, and we're all walking this path, and you come to find out these people are people, and sometimes some of them are not very good people. And so when I saw all that, I mean, the first day I worked at the mission, and Friday I'm driving a beer truck, Monday I'm in ministry. And, you know, I've been studying, my pastor at my church took me under his wing and was giving me times to preach and books to study and yada yada. But when I went to the mission, the first thing the guy said is, God and me run this place, and not necessarily in that order. And it was like, whoa. It took, within 3 months, and my wife will verify this, I was on my face on the floor in my bedroom saying, God, get me out of there. I cannot, the people at the beer company had more integrity. And it was like, I cannot believe this is the way it is. And there was one time during that period where God spoke to me, because I kept asking God, how do you allow this? Why do you allow this? And one of the things the Lord said to me was, when you get in the position, don't do that. And so that was a turning point in my life too. It's like, okay, all right. So 1, there was purpose, and there was something going forward. And 2, don't be that guy.
You know,
and finish well.
That's the idea. We all, at our age now, we're all about the same age. This idea of finishing strong, I'm going like, is there another lap? I don't know. But this idea, I mean, in this last year, some of my heroes in ministry have fallen to moral sin. A lot in Texas. I mean, they're national ministry guys, and I'm just going, what? I mean, I heard this guy preach, but Roger and I did this dive into the idea of 85% of young preachers feel that the ministry had a negative effect upon them and their family. It caused a divide between their wife. They worked 55 to 75 hours a week. They were underpaid, and this list goes down. Oh, and 80-some% admitted to depression, anxiety, all those things, and that's a lot of pressure.
Absolutely.
And because of that, they don't get men around them and have accountability, because if I show weakness, that's not the pastor the church wants, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's almost like you put on this mask, or they tell you, I remember being told, don't make friends with the congregation. Mm-hmm. Always maintain that distance. And you know what? I think too many pastors go from like seminary and right into ministry, and they don't live the real life of what it's out there. And so, for 10 years, I got up at 4 and 5 in the morning and, slugging it out with trying to make ends meet. And, and then of course my problems. So, and learning to do all that. And so I have great respect for the working person and know that they can't be at church 5 days a week. In fact, I tell the younger guys that want to be pastors, they will never have the same attitude towards everything that you have. You have a call. This is what you do day in and day out. It's a slice of their life.
Roger read this thing the other day that said most young pastors felt seminary didn't properly train them to what they socially had to deal with in the church. So they got theological training, but not to interact. And there's always going to be divisions and this and that. And so Raj, why don't you take it, because Joe's going to transition and start one of the ministries of his life that you were involved in.
Yeah, well, so as we're talking, I'm just sitting here agreeing and thinking that seminary doesn't teach us how to minister to people. It teaches us how to teach theology. It's on the streets or in the neighborhood or in the congregation where one-on-one talking to each other where things start developing. You can provide solution. And of course, the underpinning is always the scripture. But we have to learn how to be people with people, right? That's why the first time I came to this church and met you, the first thing I was attracted to was the sign out front, a perfect place for imperfect people. And I went, well, that fits. And then when I heard what the vision was of the church and the mission, it was changing lives one person at a time. Mm. I've never heard that.
It's called discipleship.
Yeah, never heard that at Catholic school. Never heard that at Catholic church. So talk a little bit more about how you got so community oriented in terms of family at church and so forth, because you were told don't make friends with the congregation.
Well, I mean, for me, I think the priest had a big deal about that. It was like, I am not different than these people. That guy, they looked at this guy and they looked at that guy, the bishops and these guys, is somehow they're at some level. And it's like, no, they're not.
Right.
And so I've always said, I'm a man like any other man. I deal with all the things a man deals with. I remember at the church I was growing up to, the Christian church, once I got saved, that guy up there never told us if his marriage was hard. He never told us personal things. He gave us a couple stories that he repeated over and over again of different events with his kid doing this, or his, way back when he was in the army. And it's like, dude, I want to hear how you navigate real life stuff as a Christian. So I believe testimony, and Scripture tells us, testimony is important. How you navigate. So I believe you have to be relatable. And relatable, not like it's a wine session, but this is how we navigate. These are things I go through. This is how we process through those things. And I do believe in process. That when God takes you, the natural and the supernatural parallel each other. So as you grow up in the natural, you also grow up in the spiritual. So you need people in front of you to help, and you need people that are peers that are at your level, and you need people behind you that you're farther than. And then we all help each other. So I believe in accountability.
Well,
in that
when you
sense.
look at AA, that was part of the building block for you because you're
Absolutely.
sponsoring people, you're being sponsored, so there's accountability on both ends, and it's relational.
Yeah, and it's rigorous honesty. You know, you just tell you tell what's going on, you know, and you quit hiding.
Yeah,
And, you
I
know.
told you that I was 12 years sober when I was invited to a meeting at his place, Huntington Beach. And it was the next Sunday that I came in, and God spoke to me and said, "You're home." And then we spoke afterwards. But what I found was completely open, candid, vulnerable discussions at church that related your life to Scripture and what was going on in those days, what's going on today, and made it all relatable. Like, I just sat there like this the first service, and I went, "This is amazing." It was so relatable. It was so I could relate to it. And my purpose came 17 years ago when I met you. I found, well, you prophesied over me after we talked. You said, "You're an AA evangelist." And I looked at you, and I've been called a lot of things in my life, but an AA evangelist wasn't one of them. But that stuck in my
But
head.
you are.
But that's what happened. That's exactly what I am. And
Yeah.
it was all under the format of recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous and NACA, whatever A it is.
Yeah.
It made God that I was taught about as a kid so real, so relatable. And I had to, what they call hitting bottom, I had to go right down to the bottom to absolutely surrender, which you didn't hear about surrender in Catholic school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why we all resonate and we've all worked together for a long time.
Right.
Is because we have the same philosophy
Right.
that people get damaged and they can also be healed, but it is in relationships.
So
And
most people think that pastors have it all together and there's
Right.
no more trauma in their life, just your childhood, you healed from that. But you and Therese went through so much trauma. Tell that story because most people who are listening don't know about your story.
well, I mean, it's been a long journey, and that's the beauty. We've been married, I don't know, going on 44 years. So it's been, but in 2011, you know, my son had addiction issues. He recovered, and I thought we were all heading in the right direction. At the same age as I was when I got in sober, 29, and for some reason, he decided to go out and died that night of an overdose, and it rocked our world. But prior to that, my
You had
other
just gotten married, they were getting
they've been married about 2.5 years. They were, you know, I mean, he was succeeding in business. Things I thought were, you know,
Really good.
and I don't know why. We had dinner with him and his wife the night before he died. You know, he died that morning, and he didn't share it with me, and or share what was going on. But he did say one thing. He said, "Dad, I'm a good liar." And you know, one of the things that when you look back after a traumatic thing, I wish I would have really probed that. But I also remember him one time telling me, "Dad, I don't want to be like the men at church. I want to just be your son." And I said, part of being a son is a father giving it input. And I said, you know, we can have that. So we've had, you know, and my son became Orthodox. He loved the history of the church. He loved the reverence and the
Ceremony.
icons and the ceremony and the mysticalness of that. And
Isn't that interesting? I have a feeling every other generation rejects what their parents said. Now, and this is more spiritual over here.
yeah, it
Yeah.
resonated with him in ways that you know, he grew up being evangelical Pentecostal, so he had that flavor, but he found and what he would say would be a deep reverence for God in that culture, and it's like, okay, you know,
So that's St. Andrews or?
no, it was Syrian Orthodox.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
Ethiopian, one of the two.
Well, we had a lot of people that were in EV Free and another big church. They were leaving, and
Yeah.
they're all college kids, and
Yeah.
and they're going down, and they loved
It was a
more.
movement. I don't know what it is today. In fact, he used to tell me, "Pops, you'd be a great, you know, priest for those guys, and it was like, you know what? I agree with a lot of what they do and the way they see things. I love the mystical things of how the spiritual and the natural are always interacting. I love that kind of stuff, but I wouldn't be able to reach the people I believe I've been called to.
There you go.
And so there's that.
You know, but that's not the only loss.
Yeah.
And
Oh, that loss though profoundly changed the way I knew God.
yeah,
Because I was so mad at him, and so, I've been in the recovery field at that point for 25 years.
so for the people listening that have gone through these kind of losses and they're disappointed and angry at God and say, I followed you, I did this, and why did you do this to me, and why me? What do you say to them?
I get it, and it's okay.
Yeah.
You learn that God, one thing I learned is that you can be gut level honest with Jesus, and he will never leave you nor forsake you.
It's okay to be upset with it.
It's okay to be upset. And people that backslide, he's not going to leave them. He's deep, and he didn't apologize. He never said, I'm sorry that I took your son. I mean, I've worked with people that tried to kill themselves in overdose and can't do it. And he's one time, and he died. That's cold, man. That was
Did you,
so cold.
just a little question here. Did you think it was fentanyl?
Fentanyl wasn't really hitting the scene until like a year and a half later. Could have been. It was around, but it wasn't the big, I think it was considered, it metabolizes into a morphine type thing.
Okay.
But it was definitely heroin or / fentanyl. But
Okay.
yeah, it was.
Well, some people would never get over that. And by the way, I don't think we ever get over. God gives us grace. Grace, he said, that's sufficient for today. And he's got to give us grace tomorrow. And he's got to give us grace the next day. But then how many years later was Sarah? And tell the story about Sarah.
Well, 7 years later, it was a Sunday morning, January 21st, 2018. And my wife had been talking. Sarah, our daughter, was in the midst of a divorce. She had 3 sons, a 20-month-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And she was talking to my wife most of the night. She had stayed at a hotel because the exchanges were getting gnarly. And, and a cop was supposed to be there to do the exchange Sunday morning at 8:30. Well, she gets home about 8, and so that, in our time, 2 hours difference, 6 o'clock, and I'm getting up that time for church. So, I'm talking to her on the phone. My wife's phone is there, and we're just, talking. She's pulling into her house to get ready for church. And she gets the baby out because he had already had the other 2 kids, and he got the baby at 9 or 8:30 at that morning, and returns all 3 kids at 4 o'clock. So she went into the house to get ready for church, and this is in Texas, and she says, she gets into the kitchen, and she goes, and she's talking on the phone, and she goes, the cabinets were all open, and somebody's been in here. So we immediately told her, get out of the house now. And the next thing we heard over the phone was, she says, don't touch me, don't touch me, don't touch me. So obviously, come to find out it was her husband. He's grabbing her. And we heard the phone drop and her start to run. And then we heard bam, bam, bam. And he shot her 3 times and killed her at the front door. And that changed our world. And one thing for me, my wife is screaming on the bed her name, and since I've been in a world of trauma times, I'm very cool and collective.
Right.
Because you're always figuring out what to do, and
Right.
kind of, when you're young, how do I handle this?
You got
What
the
do I do?
radar.
You got the radar, so I grabbed my phone. It was on the bedstand, and I call 911 here to get 911 there, and talking to him on the phone and saying, man, I gave him the address, and there's been shots fired, and it's our daughter, and yada, and And then they, a couple minutes later, they go, we're on scene, it's under control, and they hung up the phone, and they didn't talk to us for 5 hours. We couldn't get through, so we didn't know, we didn't know. But a neighbor called Therese, because we'd been to that house 3 times a year, always going there, and called her and said, Sarah's dead. And we just, so we grabbed a flight that night, because the 3 boys, are they alive? What's going on there? Because he took the youngest one in his car, in his truck, and people saw him running across the lawn with the baby under his arm and holding his gun. And so they pinged his phone, and they followed him for hours, and finally they went to pull him over, and he shot himself in the head. And
he had the baby?
Thank God. The baby was right behind him, blew out the baby's eardrum. And but thank God he had his foot was on the brake, and he cruised over to the side of the road. He didn't go head on into anything. He just cruised over slowly and parked on the embankment, and they got the baby. And
How old was the baby?
20 months.
20 months. No, this is how trauma. Have you ever noticed this? When you first got him, if there was a loud drop or a bang in the house, would he jump?
Oh, he had night terrors for a year and a half. During the day, he'd be gone, because even though they're not verbal, they are still recording, and the body is releasing trauma. He didn't gain weight or grow for 2.5 years after that. Still at the same weight, still at the same height, and everybody was traumatized, and the boys. So bottom line is, we ended up getting the kids. We're raising them.
Yeah, you told me that you're gonna, when the last one is graduated from high school, you'll be about 80 or something like that.
Yeah, I think I'll be 79.
Okay.
If I'm alive.
Well, who ever wants to be called the expert of that kind of trauma?
Well, you know what else I learned? I've forgiven him.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that process. That didn't just happen.
Oh, no, I hated the dude.
Yeah.
You replay. First of all, I couldn't get the gunshots out of my head.
Oh, yeah.
Every my waking thought, I could hear him. My going to bed, I could hear him. It was just all through the day. Same thing with my wife. And we were, I don't even remember the first year, really. It was just so much paperwork, Social Security, Army. He was in the Army. Just on and on.
Well,
all
he
the
had
court stuff
PTSD,
to
didn't he?
Yeah, he had 8 or 9 times he was deployed to
Iraq or Afghanistan.
And he was a combat. He got 2 Purple Stars. Wow. And no, I'm sorry, 2 Bronze Stars.
Bronze Stars.
Yeah, and one of them was for carrying a dude across the line of fire, because he was a medic and a ranger. So he was that guy in that group, and carrying a guy across the battlefield. And
Joe, you and I meet counseling a lot of people. I know you do, Roger. I'll have people come in and they got divorced 25 years ago, and it's like yesterday. They haven't, that defined their life. When people go through trauma, there's going to be a period of time of the grieving process that automatically defines what you're going through, but ultimately doesn't have to define who you are, right?
No, I remember not very shortly after she passed, I heard this voice, and it said, had enough? And I believe it was the enemy or a demon of some kind, and that I'm never giving up. I'm never giving in. He's not going to win. He doesn't win. And I think I've had the word in me it's so long at that point that, we will win, and I will see him again. Both of them are believers. But it's hard. It's difficult. It's sad. It's really sad. It's broke our hearts.
Joe,
and our daughter's heart.
I did some work over at City of Hope, and I did some radio interviews there, and I remember I would walk in, Roger, I'd be walking down the hall, and I look in a room, and I see a toddler sitting up, and she couldn't smile. She was going through chemo. All her hair was gone. She was beautiful. The mom and dad were at each side of the bed. The next day I walk in and it's empty.
Oh, yeah.
And for those people going through that, they're going to have loss, major loss in their life. We always know that God can restore the fields eaten by locusts, he says. But then my question is, well, as Job said, you know, it lays out that Job gets all these new kids. All his kids and grandkids die, but he didn't get the ones back that died. And I'm sure that had to affect him.
Oh, how could it not?
Right.
I think you have to, I'm a Christian, so I think you have to forgive. I think one of the hardest things that I have seen in all these years of ministry is people hold on to unforgiveness, and it wrecks them. You know, so we went through, I knew, being a pastor, I knew I had to forgive the guy that killed our daughter, and but I couldn't do it. I wanted revenge. I wanted, you know, justice. I wanted, you know, you run through a million scenarios, and you replay lots of things. But I remember about a year and a half afterwards, I got to the place where I was going to forgive him, and I forgave him. And how you forgive is you have to go through what you're forgiving him for.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just a blanket statement. I forgive him for, you know, doing this bad thing. It's like, I forgive you for robbing my daughter of life. I forgive you for robbing these children of their mother and their father.
You did that for the priest that molested you too, didn't you?
I did that for the priest that molested me. You know, and after going through all that, naming every part of our lives that he hurt us, and he hurt her, and you know, robbing her from seeing her kids grow, robbing her from seeing her children get married, yada, yada, yada. And I remember nothing, no lights went off or nothing, but you know what happened? About 3 days after I did that, I go, wow, I haven't heard the gunshots once.
Wow.
I haven't heard them. And from that point on, there was a freedom, and I never, you know, if I think about it, I can recall it, but I never hear the shots anymore.
Right.
And it just, this peace that didn't make it better, like Job, what you were saying, didn't take away it. It just enabled me to not hate anymore.
But Joe, on the other hand, and it doesn't substitute for loss, Roger, is every time I walk on this campus, especially on Sundays, I'll see guys, some of them were in prison, you know, isn't it interesting? God chooses the lowly to confound the wise. Well, that means humble. But these guys were bikers, surfers, skaters, and they would be buddies if they were drinking or doing drugs. But now they're running across the parking lot to give some guy a hug.
Oh, yeah.
And that was never their MO before. You know that.
Absolutely.
Well, that's because they were afraid.
Yeah, but you get to see that healing.
Oh, that's the beauty.
Yeah.
You know, the hard part is we do a lot of scattering seed,
Yeah.
and don't, you know, necessarily see where it goes. But God's word never returns void. So,
That's right.
you know, we do what we do. The hard part of this type of ministry is we have lots of babies. And a lot of times having, you know, parental people long-term in the Lord is where it's difficult, because we don't have them. You know, for the average Christian, this is not the environment they dig being in. They like it clean and tidy.
I have a saying, we're always working through the most unresolved conflict of the past in our present relationships. You became the father that, you know, I'll have people come up and they've said it about you or many other pastors. Well, pastor didn't say hi to me today. I said there was 20 people waiting in line to say hi to him. But the abandonment or the rejection they felt in life was projected on the one they wanted to get close to.
Sure. Yeah. And that's what you deal with. You know, when you're dealing with people in recovery, there's multiple levels of recovery. Oh. It's many faceted. So it's a stepping, just like a 1-year-old has to become a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old. So, you know, they learn in the spiritual, they learn in the emotional realm, they deal with their soul damage in a process. And if they hang around long enough, they really get to, you know, have that process. If not, God will still deal with them in some other fashion.
But that idea, and by the way, I think DJ, that's your men's ministry, what a wonderful job he's doing. I see people carrying their Bibles here on Wednesday night, and they're diving deep into that.
Sure.
You know, and you know, if we want to grow a church, I've always said grow it through men's ministry, because the women are always tired of dragging their husbands, because that's how a lot of churches were built in the past. But this church is really going to skyrocket, and you started all that, Joe. But Roger, it's His Place Church. Pastor Joe's been the pastor here for 30 years. Why don't you close it out and tell us what he's meant to you in this church?
So my life has changed drastically in the last 17 years since I met you. And not only do I have purpose, but I have ministries outside the church, which was born here. So I followed your lead. I've been mentored by you since I've been here. Well, I can say the same thing about Chris, who, our associate pastor, has been mentored by you. You've been a stalwart of shining light to hundreds and thousands of people.
Well, you guys have been both on the board.
Yeah.
You've labored here extensively, so it's never a one-man show. It's
No.
a team, and everybody plays a role. And so yeah, it's been an honor and a blessing to see you develop into who God has you to be, to see all the people that you've mentored and counseled into health.
I've never seen this guy unhappy. He really ticks me off sometimes.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer.
I do that just to piss people.
Listen, we have to run here, but Joe, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
You're
Glad to be here.
transitioning to another part of life right now, and we're still trying to figure out what pastor emeritus means.
Yeah,
But
who knows?
you're passing the baton.
These are my friends.
We always see that race, and I'm always hoping the baton actually gets in the hand.
Yeah.
And so, well, for Bob Noonan,
And Roger McDermott.
Pastor Joe Furey, and Joe, last thing, if somebody hears this and they want to contact you, is there a way they can?
Yeah, you can email me at joe.fury@hisplace.com. Joe.fury@hisplace.com, and I'll definitely get back to you. And never give up hope. You know what? You know, God is a miracle producing God, and don't let your eyes fool you. Don't go by sight, go by faith.
Okay.
God bless you.
Amen to
guys.
that.
God bless everybody. See you next time.
See you guys.
Don't grind the gears no more. You don't need another score. Don't try to run away. It's the dawn.